Welcome. This is the Drupal usability meeting for September 16th, 2022. I am Benji Fisher, moderating and sharing my screen, and also present are Aaron McHale, Quinn Pham, Ralph Kohler, and Simo Helston. So I think we're going to start today, returning to an issue we discussed last week. It's issue 2795507. Taxonomy contextual filter has confusing description. And I think since last week's meeting, I've updated the title, so that's not what the title was last week. And I see that Thomas Howell has also joined us. So let me illustrate the problem. Here I have a fresh install of Drupal 9.5 with the Umami demo profile, and also I'm sharing this site with ngrok. I pasted the link into the Zoom chat. You can log in with username and password admin. So let us edit a view. And I think the admin content view is a good example. If you open up the advanced section and add a contextual filter, search for taxonomy as taxonomy term ID, add and configure, and then you choose provide a default value, and the type is taxonomy term ID from URL. The issue is about the description of this second option. Currently, load default filter from node page, comma, that's good for related taxonomy blocks. So let me check that off. When you do check it off, you get these additional form elements, and maybe I'll also uncheck the other one. You can limit the terms by vocabulary, and you have a choice of how to handle multiple values. You can filter items that share all terms. So if the current page we're looking at has 3 different taxonomy terms, possibly from different fields attached, we only look for other pages that have all 3 of those terms, or the other option, which I think is more common, is to show all pages that have any one of those 3 terms. And again, the issue is about changing this description text. Any questions about what this does, what the context is? I don't hear or see anything. If you're trying to say something, then you forgot to unmute yourself. Okay, so I did do a little bit of experimentation after last week's meeting, and the main thing I found out is that when you check this off, it's possible. Well, I guess first of all, what it does is it checks for all taxonomy fields that might be attached to a given page. And I guess it's actually specifically related to nodes. So let me just open in a new tab something in English. So here's a recipe. It has one taxonomy term, but let's just, for kicks, is it ingredients? Right, recipes in Umami can have both a category, typically only one, but they can have any number of taxonomy terms. I know this probably isn't accurate. Oh, I think it does have mushrooms. It's probably not vegan, but anyway, it's just for the sake of example. So here again, I have a node, a piece of content, a page with 3 different taxonomy terms, 2 attached to the tags field, 1 attached to the recipe category. And I could add a related content block showing either something that has all 3 terms or something that has any one of the 3 terms. However, to get that to work, if it is 3 terms, you have to tell the filter how to handle multiple terms, 3 terms in the example, and that is hidden under this more drop down, and you have to check allow multiple values. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. I haven't looked into this other option, allow multiple filters values to work together. The other thing you'll probably want to do is check off reduce duplicates. Otherwise, if some other page has 2 of the 3 taxonomy terms attached to it, it'll show up twice on the list, which is probably not what you want. So my suggestion on the issue is that we at least mention these 2 other options that you'll want to consider when using this, and also change the text. And I guess, again, maybe I should pause and ask, are there any questions about what I've gone through so far?
Sort of. So do we know why things are separated out the way they are? So if you were to scroll down a little bit lower, is there a technical reason that the reduce duplicates is there rather than under more? So from my perspective, it seems a little bit orphaned visually and conceptually.
Yeah, there is a good reason for that. And these are generic options applied to any contextual filter, whereas the things we're looking at are very specific to what to do when the filter value is not provided in the URL.
I wasn't clear. I'm sorry. I wasn't actually talking about this section. I was wondering why the other 2 are separate from one another. I'm curious why the reduce duplicates isn't part of more. That's the. I should have said that very specifically.
Yeah, that I don't know. Anyone else have ideas on that? Yeah, as far as I know, it is a perfectly reasonable option to put reduce duplicates in this group under more.
Okay, cool. I'm if I were to guess, I think somebody thought it's used frequently and they used more to put things to produce something below the fold. But I think visually it's easier to see the relationship of additional options. And I don't, this is probably out of scope, but when we're talking about these things, more is not very descriptive. And so if we're talking about how we want people to know, like I think that your earlier statement of we want to make certain that people know these things are available. So my recommendation thinking about that is we want to group things together, like things with like, and they need a better description, because then you'd say, go to the section name, not more, that makes more sense. And you will see additional options, blah and blah. And less words, but I think that's my thinking, and I'll be quiet now. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I think that is something worth considering. And we could even make that recommendation as part of this issue, although arguably it's out of scope. So my recommendation on the issue, I think if I scroll to the bottom, here's the latest comment. I suggested having a separate title and description for the form, and the title would be Load Default Filter from Node Page. I don't love that text, but it's the start of what's already there, and it's consistent with the other option. And then on a separate line as a description, I would add, use terms from all reference fields on the node. If you select this option, then also consider the reduce duplicates and allow multiple values options on this form. So I didn't put a lot of thought into that, but it seems like a decent starting place, and a couple of people have comments. Ralph, go ahead.
Yes, I've brought up the topic in the weekly coffee call in Munich, as well as yesterday in the Drupal Dojo in Austin, and both had suggestions and an agreement for the, at first I agree, adding a description is a good thing, but one problem with, for example, the current title and also your suggestion is with load default filter. Basically, if you take a look at the modal again, you have already the radio button provide default value on top, and then you repeat load default filter. So just maybe an idea would be to change both strings. First, the suggestion either get or use term ID from term page for the first, and get or use terms referenced in or from a node. The exact wording we haven't come up with, but that would be an idea. And to add a description in the context of the second one, the terms referenced from node, and place then there the description you've did, because to add the information that there are additional configuration options at the bottom, as well as where to use that, or in which context to use that functionality, to explain it better to the user. And one additional idea and comment is, since the limit terms by vocabulary is basically some sort of a child of load default filter from node page with the current phrasing, it is basically related. And would it make sense to indent it, the checkbox, as well as the radio buttons, so it's visually apparent to the user that it's some sort of sub configuration?
Yeah, let me take that last point first. I did mention before that the limit terms by vocabulary and these two radio buttons only appear when this is selected. It's a progressive disclosure. And I agree, it looks visually as if we have three checkboxes lined up. It looks as those are sort of equivalent options. I like the idea of indenting or grouping these additional options that show up when this option is selected.
Because the point is, if you get to that option page at a later point and the checkbox for default filter from node page is already checked, and then you haven't set that and some other user has, then you're unaware that they are dependent on the previous. And if you don't know that, then it's even more a problem, a potential problem at least.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the suggestions you're making are expanding the scope of the current issue, but I think that's okay. I think it's a good idea to keep the text of these two options consistent, and my initial suggestion was to keep the first part But if we change both of them, then they'll still be consistent. And if we can make it clearer, I think that's worth doing. So I'm not opposed to expanding the scope. So Aaron, I think you were the next one who had your hand raised.
No, I think Thomas is before me, so I'll yield to Thomas.
No, Aaron.
Yes.
Aaron, you go first. We already talked today, so you go first.
Fair enough. Thank you for yielding. Yeah, okay, just because I think like the thing I'm thinking, so the first thing that was in my head was like, does this work for more than just Node? Like if you were using media or block or whatever. So in that case, like, is Node the right word to use? Like, should we use like something else like entity?
I
so
can
don't
answer that.
know. Okay, go ahead.
Drupal maintains a separate table with just taxonomies and node IDs.
Okay,
and
gotcha.
that's what this uses. So yes, it does work only with nodes.
Okay, from an architectural perspective, don't love that, but that's where we are. So I guess the other thing that's in my head is that I like what you were saying then, what was being talked about some way of like visually linking the following options together. I think there's a broader issue around just this whole UI. There's a lot going on. Like you can jump through the radio buttons and the options will also change depending on the radio buttons. And for instance, if you went to like display all results for a specific field, all these options would disappear. And if you went to show, you picked another one from that list, you would potentially get different options on the page. So yeah, I've never really loved the way this is all presented. I don't have a better idea, but I feel like there's something not quite right about how all these things are disclosed and how things appear and disappear depending on what you select. I think it's not it's a general issue with use. I think that it happens a lot of places, but it's not ideal. So I think we're on the right track here. For sure, but I definitely see some wider work that could be done on these pages.
So you actually think that the progressive disclosure is not a good thing in this case? Is that
I think that what I will say is I think we already have it. Let's work with it because I think that's kind of out of scope for this specific issue. But in general, I'm not really a fan of the way that I think the way that this whole form uses progressive disclosure can be problematic because fields are just appearing and disappearing sometimes, and it's not always clear what fields relate to what options. Certainly, I think the fact that if we indent those, as was suggested, that's a good start to making it a bit clearer what fields relate to what options. But yeah, I think there's probably a wider issue here around the way these forms are structured.
Okay, and let me mention, I heard this module, or I saw it mentioned in some other discussion, taxonomy entity index. And I'm guessing just from the title that it does the same thing that Drupal core does for just nodes. It maintains normalized index of all terms associated with a specific entity and revision. The core taxonomy index table only maintains its data for published nodes. This module maintains its data for all entity types, regardless of published or not, and also indexed by revision. So, so if you don't like the architectural decision that Drupal just does it for nodes, Drupal core does it just for nodes, you could use this module.
Right. And that's probably something that maybe should find its way into core one day, but that's an entirely different discussion, not for today's discussion.
And it is compatible with Drupal 10, which is how it came up recently. That's obviously a recent development. Okay, so again, do you have specific recommendations at this point, or are you just saying that we should reconsider how this page works?
I agree with everything that's been said. So I think we, at least in this issue, we should definitely keep the scope to what is here. But I think there's definitely a case for opening or finding a follow-up issue to look at more broadly at this whole form and how things are sort of disclosed or not disclosed. I do wonder if there's a way, because there's some, if we consider just the two load default filter options there, I wonder if there's if you know, we've got a bit of repetition going on there. So is there a way we could maybe group those? That's what I'm kind of thinking, like how we have the ability to sort of, you know, we have a caption for below for the two radio options, multiple value handling, and then you get, you know, the two different options. I wonder if there's something similar there for these options we could do. I'm not sure. You know, like for instance, take the first part of the text, like the load default filters, and then you have, you know, checkboxes for node and checkboxes for term page, etc. But again, I also quite like the wording you were proposing, like the changes. So, you know, we might change it.
Okay, yeah, I think the suggestion that these dependent fields, the ones that only appear when this is selected, the suggestion that those be indented, I think could apply here too.
Yeah,
like these options only appear when you've chosen this type. If you choose fixed, then you get a different field to fill in. Content ID doesn't have any. So it, again, out of scope for the current issue, but something worth considering in the future is that we always, I guess, create an extra div with a little bit of padding or margin when
yeah.
we add things by progressive disclosure.
Probably using field set for that. I think I mean, we don't tend to talk about implementation, but if I was to make a recommendation from a usability and accessibility perspective, probably field set is the appropriate choice for that.
Okay.
But I want to yield to, I want Thomas to speak now because I've been speaking for a bit. So go ahead, Thomas.
Yes.
Well, the good and happy part is I agree with everything everyone has said. I think the wording we might want to focus on a little bit, like for me, a key term is default, because that does have meaning. It's not just like what Ralph was suggesting. I want to make certain that if we were to make those types of changes to the load default filter section, I would like default to be in there because that has meaning. And beyond that, I think that this form has not changed a huge amount since similar things were built in views in Drupal 6. I think that the complexity is such that it's a huge project. So yes, it has to be separate. But I think some of the problems we are trying to solve today exist because of the broader context of how this is almost impossible to understand. I have absolutely used this particular contextual filter a bunch of times because functionality wise, this is the type of feature that's really nice to be able to have a separate block on a page and show things that you've related to that page that are taxonomy terms. And that allows a better interaction with taxonomy. So to kind of get to the point, I think that anything we do here is a stopgap and we can do some visual things, but overall the form itself is overwhelming and you have to know exactly that this thing exists. And my concern is, let's say we modify and fix this with the field sets that you said, Aaron. But whatever we use to fix this, then we need to go through the rest of the contextual filter, and anywhere else that behavior is occurring, it has to also be changed. So if that is the new model for progressive disclosure of information and a contextual filter, we need to make certain we're doing that everywhere for the contextual filter, not just for this problem set or this issue.
Actually, let's peek at the markup here. It's possible that there's already a field set, or or something. Oh, I have twig debugging enabled. Limit terms by vocabulary, div. Div. Drupal, of course, suffers from divitis. Okay, so no. So the things added by progressive disclosure are not already grouped in a field set or not even a div. I was just curious. It's okay. So I think we have general agreement, but we just need to think about the particular words to use. And let me just use the comment field down here as a place where I can edit text. And I guess the other option we're also considering changing. So that is low default filter from term page. And I think Ralph had the first close to a concrete suggestion. Go ahead, Ralph. You're muted.
Oh, sorry, I forgot. Okay, I quickly read the suggestions we came up during the 2 meetings, but one note up front. Another suggestion for the second title, you currently have load default filter from node page. If you strike that and use just the first sentence of your description, that is way more comprehensible for me, at least. Use terms from all term reference fields on the node. That is way more concise and comprehensible. And in the same way, for that is use terms referenced on the node or in the node, from node. I'm not sure. The suggestion was something like around use terms referenced in or from node.
Instead of on the node?
Yeah, or on the node, yeah. Could also be used. Use terms referenced on the node. As another.
Oh, okay. So
as another suggestion.
Use terms referenced on the node?
Yeah, referenced on the node.
Maybe we should use the word content instead of node, because we don't typically, well, we try to avoid using the word node in the UI. And unless we want to be really specific about this is, like we said, this is for nodes and not anything else.
Yeah, that's a sticky issue. And then if we use one of these options, what would the corresponding title be for the other option?
Use term ID from term page. That is the suggestion that was a consensus between the 2 meetings.
Thomas, go ahead.
I still have a concern around the fact that I feel like it's not bike shedding, but we're in a really small area of a form that's incredibly complex. And I'm like, in talking about getting rid of the term node and replacing with content, this is a highly technical form. And I think we would have to go through and look at what happens when we use things that aren't just use taxonomy filter. I would want to make certain before we make a final recommendation that we aren't changing things and making them all polished in just this choice. And we're creating just a little island in the rest of this contextual filter. So,
Okay, so you'd want to review the form as a whole and make sure that we have some consistency.
right, because if we're saying load default filter in other contexts or similar language, I'm concerned that we're fixing one thing to make it make more sense. And there's a difference between just adding a description and trying to add information to something. So it's about the consistency thing again. I want to make certain that we're consistent even outside of just these two titles. I want to make, if we are, then we're golden. I'm a little bit concerned.
Okay, my preference is I'd rather go with this slightly longer option than this shorter one, because I do want to be explicit about all term reference fields. And any other suggestions or amendments to these proposals? And we can certainly add a comment with the wording we're suggesting, with the caveat that, as Thomas says, we should review the entire form for consistency before making a final decision. Okay, so I guess shall we first take a quick vote between just removing the what used to be here and adding a description as one option. And then the second option would be to change both titles and use the shorter description, since the first part of the description would be added to the title. So first option, please raise your hand or speak up if you want to just shorten the title and add a description. I get a thumbs up from Aaron. And I get a thumbs up from Simo. And the second option, raise your hand or give a thumbs up or speak up if you want to change both of the titles. First one would be probably use term ID from the term page. And the second would be one of these options, and then the slightly shorter description. And I get a thumbs up from Ralph and Thomas and Aaron. So Aaron, you're giving thumbs up to both options. I suppose that's allowed.
Yep, I am incredibly indecisive right now.
And Simo, you're also approving of both options?
Yeah.
Okay. And Thomas and Ralph, remind me what your preferences were.
The second one, the reason I like the second one is it's I understand that this is the title of this is filter, so it's less repetitive and focuses on what actually matters, that it's terms, it gives the actual situation. But you, like at the very top, the black bar at the top of the modal is configure contextual, like, this is a filter. So I feel like we say filter a lot, and you say it again, the contextual filter values are provided by the URL. And when the filter value, like, so to me, I could just say load default. I don't even need to have the word filter in there. So the second option is more to the point.
Wasn't
gives-
someone saying early on that they wanted to keep the default, the word default?
Oh, I want to keep
There.
the word default, yes, but right now I've seeded wanting to have default in there somewhere because I'd rather have legibility than telling people that default is there. Now, if we get through this and someone's like, hey, we can add default in parentheses somewhere, or there's a way to work the word default in to option 2, but I vote for option 2 pretty clearly because I think it makes it more readable to me.
Okay. And hang on a moment, Aaron. Ralph, what was your preference again?
Also option 2.
Okay. Aaron, go ahead.
Yeah, so just on default, actually, Angie, if you could flip back to the screen in views, we actually already so when you get to this part, when you get to this form, you've already selected provide default value, and then you selected taxonomy term ID from URL. So I think for these options, the word default becomes slightly less important because you've already kind of followed the path of, okay, I'm providing a default value, and now you're just sort of configuring more specifically what that default value is or should be.
Okay, so you don't think that it's important to keep the word default in there?
Yeah, I don't think it's critical. It depends how much we want to reinforce it. Like we could have another head, another caption or heading that says like, default, load default value, like default value configuration or something. But again, I think that you've already been down that path of saying, I want to provide a default value kind of thing.
Okay. Simo, go ahead. You are muted.
Yeah, so I just noticed that in the second option, like from term page, we use term ID, and then in the second, we don't use the term ID, so we don't mention ID. So I think it should be kind of the same because it is more or less the same. So we should either use ID or not. So it would be clear that it's kind of the same thing, but the other one uses multiple and the other one uses just one.
I think that's a good point, and I've been saying all along we should try to keep these consistent. We're getting a thumbs up from Ralph. So use term IDs rather than just use terms. And we also get a thumbs up from Thomas. Zoom doesn't give you a thumbs down option, does it? I guess you have to speak up if you or type into the chat window if you want to give a thumbs down. Okay,
it does have thumbs down. You just have to search for it.
Oh, okay.
I was going to say if I ever use it, I'll let you know where it is, but I found it.
Okay, and Ralph mentions that it works in the chat. Okay. So I guess we're pretty close to finished here. We just have to decide which of these two titles we want to use for the option, the main option we're discussing. Use term IDs, and then say first option from all term reference fields on the node, and second is use term IDs referenced on the node. So who votes for the first option? Get a thumbs up from Ralph. I think that's my preference as well. Get a thumbs up from Simo. And again, you're allowed to vote for both if you like them both. So I count thumbs up from Thomas as well. So I count 4 votes, including mine, for the first option. And who approves of the second option? No one prefers that one, as far as I can tell. Okay, so we will go with the second option. I'm sorry, the first option. So let me just delete this. And this is already in the comment field, so I will use that as the basis for a comment I can add to the issue shortly after the meeting. And let me add a caveat. Consider entire form for consistency before final recommendation. Again, I will clean that up before I submit the comment. Are we done here? Ready to move on to another issue? Aaron.
Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of maybe take the opportunity to illustrate an idea that I've been bubbling around in the background as to how we might, improve the user experience here. So if you don't mind, I just want to briefly share my screen, and then I'll,
Of course.
because it's easier, I can demonstrate it that way.
Except, Zoom is not letting me relinquish.
I think it did, and now I think I'm sharing hopefully the right screen. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so if I go into the screen we were just looking at, and I just wanted to illustrate, like, obviously this is the first option, and you kind of, the way this is structured, you kind of have to pick one of these. And again, to illustrate, like if I click on this one, I get a whole field that appears, and I have to scroll down, and it's, again, indenting will help this, but particularly if I select, one of these, for instance, like display a summary, there's a lot that appears here, and then it's not always clear that these, if you do that, it's going to change what's available. So what I was thinking actually is to address that. We could borrow some patterns that exist in other parts of Views UI. So for instance, over here under format, we've got format, table, and settings. When I come into table, I can change the layout, and then I can go to the settings screen to have more granular configuration in that. So what I'm wondering, if we can kind of borrow that pattern. So with the contextual filter, we would provide these, we would essentially split it up into different screens. So these options would be on the first screen, and then the next screen would give you, like if you select to provide default value, the default value options would be on the next screen. And what were we on? We're on this one. And by doing that and splitting it up into more than one screen, it probably gives us the opportunity to provide a better experience for some of these nested options, let's say, that appear and disappear. So that might be a good way to more broadly address this form, by using an existing pattern that's already there and established. We can see other examples of that, like in the menu. So maybe menu is not a great example, but again, you can then come into, you get a further screen where you can configure other aspects of it. And I think, maybe the same for like permissions, for instance. So you can select the access type, but then there's like a second screen where you can have more granular control over what that is. So I would say, if we were to look at a follow-up issue for kind of redesigning that experience, that would be maybe a way we would want to go. So that's what I was going to share on that.
So I think the closest example is when you select filters or fields in views.
Mm-hmm.
You select which ones you want to use, and then you get a series of modal windows giving you settings for each one of the fields you've selected.
Right. Yeah, essentially that's it. Yeah. So we could do something like that.
But I think that's horrible. When you select multiple, like when you first create something from the UI, and then you select like 10 different fields, and then you have, which was it? Can I go back? No, I clicked wrong. No, I confused. Which one was that?
Oh yeah, I would agree that specifically is not ideal. And we probably don't have to worry about that in this case, because you can only select one of those options. So that wouldn't really, we wouldn't really be, it's not that you can have more than one. Let me load this back up. Yeah, it's not like you can select more than one of these, so that wouldn't be too much of a concern for this specific case, I think.
I think ultimately with a bigger issue, we need a new behavioral pattern than what we have. Because I would see and there's somewhere I remember a case where you can go through kind of like a wizard modal type approach, but then when you're done, then you have like the fully filled out form. And if you want to make modifications, you can make modifications, and that helps to address if you get lost, you can kind of come back and fix a particular thing. But the way it is now, there's no guidance. And I guess it was weird. What makes this issue weird for me is we're talking about adding descriptions to just one confusing thing out of many confusing radio buttons. Like I find the lack of description on all of the buttons to be like, it's hard to know what like, why would I choose provide default value? Like, unless
Yeah.
you know what you're going to do, this page alone just confuses me. So.
Yeah, that's why I also think like splitting this up into multiple screens will actually alleviate that slightly, because then it makes it easier for us to provide some more descriptions and text without making the UI feel even more cluttered.
Agreed.
Okay, I might create a follow-up issue then to explore this specific idea further, and we can obviously bring that up at a later discussion, but I just wanted to share that now. And yeah, I will stop sharing just now.
Okay, now I actually was not able to see your screen during that. Do people
Oh.
see my screen again?
No.
Let's see. I still can't stop share. Maybe I can do a new share. Well, I can neither, unless you see my screen now, Zoom is currently not letting me see anyone else's screen, and it's not letting me share my screen.
No screen visible.
So let's see. I think I'm going to leave Zoom and rejoin if I can. I hope that'll work. And shall we go on, Ralph? Would you like to share your screen and talk about rearranging the contextual filters?
Yes, I could quickly do that.
And again, if you want, I'll paste it in again to the chat. You can use the same site I've been sharing, and I hope I will be back in a minute. How do I leave? I can end the meeting, but it's not even letting me leave myself. Well, go ahead, Ralph.
Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes, I can.
Oh, okay. It's about issue number 297. Oh, is Benji already back?
I never left.
Oh, okay. Okay, then. Okay, it's issue number 2975616. Move relationships above contextual filters in views advanced settings. I go quickly through the steps to reproduce to illustrate the problem. At first, let's create a view. Test. Show content, and we choose the article content type. Then we create a page, test, and got to delete the other one. Anyway, within the advanced sections, we now click to the add button for contextual filters, and then we quickly search for ROL, and we don't find anything. We click on cancel, and we now go to the relationships and add user content. apply, and then we go back to the contextual filters. And now we get one contextual filter that was previously not found. There was a discussion inside the issue. It was according to the issue already brought to a previous usability meeting, where there was sort of consensus that is a useful thing, because the suggested way to fix it is to switch the position of relationships and contextual filters. But then there were points brought up that relationships are used, or no, was it the other way around? That I guess it was contextual filters were used way more often than relationships. No, contextual filters, it was comment number 20. Yeah, one of our concerns was muscle memory, since contextual filters is a 60 to 70% use case versus relationships more like 10 to 20%, and changing that might cause problems to the user. So from my perspective, I understand the point made in number 20 by WebCheck, but at the same time, being completely unaware that in case, for example, like the described one, adding a relationship is necessary to get certain contextual filters to see them, and be unaware until that point is also not advisable. Let's put it that way. Therefore, either way, the position could be changed, or if the position should be kept, then it has to be found a way to indicate that there are, or if it's possible at all, that there are certain contextual filters that need to add a relationship first.
Thomas, do you agree with that idea that relationships are used much less frequently than contextual filters?
No, I disagree, because I use relationships constantly. But I find relationships even more confusing to recall when you don't use them frequently than contextual filters. The entire advanced section is kind of nightmarish. And I honestly, I feel like they keep it hidden because they hope that 99% of people don't use it. And the key to remember about views is really just human language and concepts on top of SQL. It just generates SQL, and you can blow up a website performance-wise very easy with both contextual filters and relationships, and there's 0 warnings on it. So that said, it's powerful. It's one of the strongest parts of all of Drupal, and you can do really cool things as a site builder. And I think they belong, but I think that there needs to be more guardrails and more instruction and description to help people understand, because you shouldn't need a PhD to fill out a contextual filter and get the type of very basic, I want a block that shows me X on a page. Like, it makes it much more difficult to get what I would think of as a very recipe-driven thing.
Interesting. Okay, but I was also thinking that I think relationships are used more frequently than contextual filters, but I know that you have broader experience in that than I do. And I think Thomas and I both agree that that is not an argument for keeping contextual filters first. Go ahead, Aaron.
Thanks. And I'm mindful that we've only got 3 minutes left. So I'm going to keep this brief by literally reading what I wrote in Slack. So I'm less convinced by the muscle memory argument. The first time the change happens and people see it, yeah, they might click the wrong thing once or twice, but their muscle memory will relearn. You could apply the same argument to almost every change we make, which causes a UI to be changed. someone somewhere will have their muscle memory impacted for a brief moment, I don't think that's a good justification for not making an improvement, particularly when it comes to usability. If the change we make has an overall positive impact, then we should make that change. So that's my opinion on the subject. Therefore, I'm for switching them.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think Ralph replied in Slack that he was convinced by that argument. I'd also like to point out that if you're right and that relationships are infrequently used, then it's only a short line in front of contextual filters. It's not really pushing it way down the page.
Right.
So I would say if there's a good argument for putting relationships first, let's go ahead and put them first.
I'm also biased because I use relationships much more than contextual filters, and I always I remember actually thinking like, why isn't this like there on the top? Because I always felt it should, but that's just my bias.
Okay.
And I think that's I think the anecdotal evidence here would suggest that there's clearly no user research done to support the the idea that relationships are used a lot less than contextual filters, because apparently it's all contextual.
Was that a pun?
That was. Thank you for picking up on that.
You were very deadpan. Okay. Yeah, as Aaron says, we are running up against the hour. I think we have consensus on this. So if there's a functional reason for putting contextual filters after relationships, let's do it. And we are at the end of the hour. So thank you all for joining. Zoom doesn't let me do unlimited meetings. It doesn't let me schedule unlimited meetings. So we're actually going to have a different Zoom link starting next week. And I have to remember to update the robot in Slack for that. But see you next week, I hope. And thank you again for joining. Oh, and Quinn, one more thing I forgot to mention. If you give me your Drupal.org username in Slack, or if you comment on the issue for today's meeting, then I can give you issue credit for attending.
And one more thing before, there's a poll in Slack. Please go vote in the poll about the fast approaching daylight savings time change.
Thank you, Aaron. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.